Now let's move on to news abroad, or on the continent rather. South Sudan is waking up to a new hope for peace this morning. Africa's youngest nation has signed a new ceasefire deal with rebels led by former President Riek Machar. Now this is a second peace accord between the two parties in less than 2 months. The peace accord comes after the two parties failed to honor a series of similar agreements in the past, including the latest one in May. The accord signed in Ethiopia's capital city Addis Ababa includes the formation of an interim unity government, and for the first time since the peace talks began, the East African states threatened to slap the warring sides with sanctions if they do not agree. The warring parties have been under pressure from the neighboring countries who threaten to impose sanctions on South Sudan if the war continues. Now, to discuss the latest developments in South Sudan, we are joined in studio by an independent analyst, Tom Wheeler, to tell us a little bit more. Tom, good morning to you and welcome to AM News.
Good morning, Ellis.
Now, Tom, let's first take a look at the latest and the last ceasefire, rather, that was signed in May. What went wrong there?
I think there's this lack of trust between the two sides. And so, although they sign these peace agreements, the fighting at ground level still goes on. And so we've had a series of these things. The great hope that when South Sudan became independent in 2011, that this, this violence which had existed between Sudan and South Sudan would come to an end, has unfortunately not been proved real.
Now, what are some of the major stumbling blocks in relation to these the ceasefires being broken every time?
I think it all boils down to the competition between the president of Sudan, Kiir, and his former deputy, Machar, who fell out last year, and Kiir dissolved his cabinet and kicked out Machar. And then it became an inter-tribal, inter-ethnic fight that went right across the country and pretty well destroyed everything. There are no crops planted this year. People are facing starvation. Many people have died. Many people have been displaced in this rivalry between these two political figures.
Some analysts suggest that this could become a civil war. Is that correct? Or
it's very close. It's very close. Unless this peace agreement that was agreed in Addis Ababa this week is actually implemented, that these two leaders become serious about implementing them, faced as they are with sanctions.
Now, this time the Intergovernmental Agency for Development seemed to be determined to make this particular peace agreement work, and they said there's a threat of sanctions if the deal does not work. Do you think they have really the means and the ability to see this threat realize?
Well, the Americans have already imposed a number of sanctions against lesser officials. These are travel sanctions and of that nature. So the idea is that they would also apply that sort of sanction to Kiir and Machar and the people around them. In other words, make life very uncomfortable for them. I think it's becoming a question for the IGAD, the Intergovernmental Association for Development in East Africa, is becoming a great embarrassment that they can't get this thing to work. So they are going to apply pressure to make sure it works this time.
What will be the impact on South Sudan if the threats were implemented?
Well, I think it's more on the individuals, the leaders, than it would be on the country itself, because the UN is going in to try and deal with the hunger problems that are starting to arise, the effect on the ordinary people. But somehow this has got to be solved so that the great hope of a South Sudanese republic can really be realized and can move forward.
Now, you talked about the United States sanctions. Did they have any desired effect at all?
Well, this is just the first step, It means that several of the less important, less senior people in the hierarchy can't travel abroad now, can't go to the United States. Probably their bank accounts are affected and that sort of thing. So it's difficult to measure these things, but I think it's more a question of that leaders don't want to have these things imposed on them. We see what's going on in Ukraine, where the Europeans and the US have imposed sanctions on certain high-profile individuals in Russia, and it's the same parallel sort of situation and means of trying to deal with the problem.
So you would suggest then that if these sanctions are imposed on the leaders, that they would probably hear and listen to what the international community is saying?
That is the great hope, but of course it remains to be seen. One can't, if the animosity is so great that they simply cannot work together, then the problem goes on. But hopefully it will start to come to an end now.
Now, can we expect the two leaders, President Salva Kiir and the rebel leader Riek Machar, to work together going forward? It seemed like there was hope in the beginning when the two countries, South Sudan and Sudan sort of split from each other.
Yeah.
There would be that potential.
Yeah. One, again, can only hope that with these various pressures put on them by various quarters, the UN, the IGAD in East Africa and the international community, that they will see sense, because Kiir dissolved his government because he was in conflict with Machar last year. Now, if they've got to come together again and form some sort of a unity government, then that is the solution. If they can't agree, then we're back to square one and the problem continues.
Mr. Wheeler, thank you so much for joining us here in studio on AM Live. That was Mr. Tom Wheeler, an independent analyst, giving us more details on the situation in South Sudan. But right now, let's go to the weather forecast with Philip Hawkins. And I think he's got some very exciting news about what's happening in Brazil.